Good morning, afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen, whatever time that you're tuning in the program called What's Going On allpointstv.com. And I want to also thank Mr. Paul Herring over there at WFOV 92.1. And we are coming together for another edition of the program on Monday. Let's see here, today is the 16th. And we're getting closer and closer to Christmas. Hope you are getting ready to get all of your presents together and your family, and you'll have a wonderful time during this celebration, probably the most important celebration in the nation's holiday season, only if competed with by Thanksgiving, which is definitely a family gathering. So we want to thank you for stopping by. We'll be here for the next hour, and we're going to be saying a few things to continue our dialogue about the true interpretation of the Constitution, and we'll try to say a few things about what some of the others are saying. And John and I were just talking about it a few minutes ago, how surprising it is, some of the comments that are being made. Because I had to tell you something. Some of the things that are being said out there are, stunning. And as a person that posts on Facebook every day, I was reading some of the comments. Some of my friends, Don Heck is a very good friend of mine. I had met him on Facebook some years ago, and then we lost contact for 2 years as I was off of Facebook. And he somewhat, I guess you have to say, hunted me down, so to speak, because he kept looking for me and kept calling around, calling numbers that had George Moss, and finally found me. And when I get back on Facebook, he asked me if I would visit him out in Arizona. One of the best decisions I made was to go out there, and I found people of like mind, and which I'm talking about, people that have some modicum of understanding of the Constitution. Although in their case it was much more than a modicum of understanding of the Constitution. These were people grounded in the Constitution, and they are definitely holding on to the Second Amendment and grabbing onto their guns and their religion and all the other things they criticize the conservatives for. But I ran into those persons out there in Kingman, and it was one of the best trips that I've had. I was out there. I had planned to go since I was going to Las Vegas to my timeshare. I had planned to go out there and just kind of do a roundabout. Go in there and stay a day, sleep over, and then the next morning get up and go to my timeshare. But Don Heck convinced me to stay for a few days. That's one of the best decisions I made by staying. Let's say I stayed there 3 days, and I spent 4 days at my timeshare, and that was the best 3 days that I spent away from home, because I'm always interested in, when I travel, I'm always interested in having conversations with people so I can find out what the temperature is like, the political temperature is like in these different places. And I found Kingman to be right down my alley, so to speak. It was just a tremendous, to go to the Trump headquarters is one of the highlights. But and then talking to people that were there, some of them were Hispanics that were there that had left out of California, and they had left because why people leave in California, there's a tidal wave of people moving out of California. And the reason why they're doing it is because California is such a basket case state, led by some of the most, I don't even know how you define the leadership in California, but some of the most out of touch politicians in the country are running California. And it is, I don't know if it seems to be a state that is that's finished with those kind of politics they have out there. That state, I don't know how that state can survive. So you see them running into Arizona, you see them running into Texas, and you see people running out of there going to other states. And just looking at what's going on in California, you know why. In fact, they don't even making the movies in California anymore. All the movies are made outside because of the policies that they have in that state. So anyway, I give a shout out to Don. I want to thank you again for inviting me. And that was a vacation that I will long remember. In fact, I will never forget it. And that so we'll and I'll say a few things about some of the posts that Don Heck had a post on Facebook, and they were applauding what had been said by Jonathan Turley and Alan Dershowitz, and the comments were that they had seen Dershowitz on Mark Levine's program, Life, Liberty, and Levine, and they were just really impressed with what Professor Emeritus Dershowitz said, and I had to write something about the comments he had made because I'm a little bit more grounded in the Constitution than those persons are. They have good hearts and they have good intent and things of that sort, but they have not spent the time that needs to be spent in understanding the document. And if you, it's not like you're reading a novel. You have to really understand the wording in the Constitution, because the wording is really sophisticated above the level of the educational system that we have in the country right now. This some of the things that's written in the Constitution can easily go over people's heads, because the education at that time, believe it or not, trumped, and no pun intended, but it trumps the education we have today. And those persons that are coming out of these universities today, their education is far inferior to the education that was going on when I was coming up. They're not reading for example, the Federalist Papers. I read that in high school.
When I was in junior high school, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
When I was in junior high school, we had like a civics class. I forget the exact title. What was a civics class? And because of my grandfather's influence, my mom's dad, he had bought the family. He bought all his kids, their families, because they all had families, books about around the holidays about American history. And because of my understanding and reading of all those books, I didn't even have to go to class. I'd come up to take the test, and then I'd go back and do whatever I wanted to do, because I already knew the stuff that he was teaching.
Yeah.
And it kind of, he liked me, but he didn't like the fact I would challenge him, because he would make an assertion, and I knew the full story because I read it on my own, not just a textbook or his. Because the guy who was teaching was more on the left. But he was teaching the civics class about the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the history leading up to that. So I can't really fault him on that. But then again, if he was actually teaching now this way forward, I think he would have been really kind of a Marxist, hardcore Marxist. Mm-hmm. And he had been a World War II veteran. He had served his time, in the military, and then came out and went to college in the GI Bill. And a lot of guys I knew of that era would have this kind of hesitancy to be critical of government, or they'd want to see the expansion of government programs and power. But anyway, I took all these classes, and I at least got that much understanding from him. But I was glad and fortunate that I was able to see their fuller story from the books I had read on my own.
Yeah. John, I couldn't tell what my instructors' politics were in the classrooms where I was. They were subject matter oriented, so that in math they covered math. They didn't go outside their level of expertise, and in the government class they taught the subject matter. So this idea of the ideology entering into the classroom was a new phenomenon for me, because I could not, even in my undergraduate college training, I think I detected more of it when I was doing my postgraduate work. But in my undergrad work, I couldn't tell, quite frankly, as I think about it, what their political orientation was. So in that sense, it's been changed. There's been a quantitative change in that regard. But in high school, I certainly did not detect any bias. In fact, we had a lot of things going on outside the classroom. I was in Birmingham when Rosa Parks was arrested in Montgomery, Alabama in 1955. I was in elementary school, which kind of dates me. It wasn't even discussed. You were interested in it, and you went and read the newspaper about it. But in the classroom, you walk into the math class, they talked about math.
See, up here in the north here, or Michigan, the teachers had a tendency, because I remember hearing about teachers, local teachers here, back when Nixon was the vice president for Eisenhower?
Eisenhower.
And he was very antagonistic towards communists. There were a couple of high school teachers here in the Flint area, sisters, that lived in the same house, spinsters, I guess you'd call it, back then. And they actually had photographs of themselves with their face showing, holding up their Communist Party membership, tried to taunt Nixon. And I guess they got arrested, then they turned around and complained about it. So teachers did have a tendency from the onset, the 1930s, 40s, 50s, to be more on the left than and it was pronounced. They actually discussed that in classrooms. So
yeah, that is different. I'm reading this book, John. Now that you mentioned that, I'm reading this book by Poe, and I think this is co-written with Poe and not David Collier.
Horowitz.
Horowitz, and I think this he co-authors a lot of books with Peter Collier, but I think he wrote this one with Poe. It's called his revisiting the Sixties. It's a very intriguing book. It's another masterpiece that David Horowitz is part of, and I read a few of his books, and each one very intriguing. He thinks out of the box. He once was as radical, by the way, back in the 60s. He and he's over the Ramparts magazine and so on.
Mitch, did you know that there was a writer for the National Review? I think it was named Carl Hess, because he opposed the war and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
He wrote for National Review, which is a conservative magazine. He wrote also articles for Ramparts magazine too, to oppose the war. Yeah, so there was kind of a crossover there. But
yeah, that's the radicalization that I was on this other side of while I was in undergrad, pretty much undergrad school, and then of course in my high school, in my public school education, you didn't have the ideological orientation so much embedded in the culture that you had that. In the classroom, I was taught. I think that's why I'm not bragging, but I was very well trained in the subject areas, and I'm in all the areas as far as that's concerned, at least to a greater or lesser degree. I consider myself to be in all the areas, and because the focus was one, and then I spent a lot of time in the library because I didn't have the lunch money, so. I was hiding out in the library, and there were these books. So I said I might as well read while I'm in here, and I did that every day for 4 years. You try that, and after you come out, you'll know something because there's something being taught in the classroom, and you're getting a lot of it on your own by spending your lunch period at 45 minutes for your lunch hour. You are spending that time around books. So I guess that's why I'm surrounded by books in my home, but. I'm amazed by how the scholars misunderstand basic, concepts, and I think I've written about this on Facebook. I think it's a literacy problem. I think we have a society that cannot read. I don't mean they can't pronounce the words, but literacy is an interpretive skill. And you have to be able to have some idea of what's being stated. So when you're reading, you have to read with some understanding of what's being said. And I'm getting the impression that these scholars that have all these degrees are not that literate, because they're all saying the same thing. And if you are in fact reading this for yourself, and you're saying what these other persons are saying, and they're reading it for themselves, then we do have a literacy problem. It would be different if you had one person that read something, and then these other person just repeating it. That's bad, because they're then parroting based upon someone else's understanding. That's not necessarily good. But at least it's understandable from the standpoint that it does not have anything to say necessarily about their own literacy. But if you're reading it and you're seeing the same thing that they're saying in the language, and you are quoting the language based on your understanding of it, and that's what you're saying about it, for example, in the impeachment process, then there's a literacy problem in the country, because the Constitution, although written in a different time period, and some of the terms are used in a different genre than they are used right now, if you can read, you can get through the text and you can interpret what is being said if you understand how it's written. That's why I disagree with those persons that say that, and everybody's saying it. All the scholars are saying it. They're saying the Constitution does not, in fact, state what is meant by a natural-born citizen. I heard that when I was in Arizona. And they were trying to make Ted Cruz, they wanted Ted Cruz to be eligible to run for president because once Donald Trump serves a second term, which he's going to serve a second term, so y'all can just get off that right now. They are not going to be able to defeat Donald Trump in 2020, and it's going to be a bloodbath in terms of cleaning out that viper's nest.
What do you think about the report?
In the House.
Through the report that some people are saying that a 34% of the black population that they polled said they would actually are supporting Trump. 34% is a huge chunk off the, if that's true.
That's what I said in that post as well. John just made the comment about his having read a poll. I've seen the same poll that says upwards of 34% of blacks will be crossing over from the Democratic Party, where they were in fact voting upwards of 90% for the Democratic candidate. They're now saying that 1/3 of black voters will be voting for Donald Trump. And if that is true, let me say this to you. If that is true, then the Democratic Party is finished. All you need, quite frankly, in order to turn the tables upside down on the Democratic Party is have 20% of blacks voting in the opposite party. And they're talking about more than that, 10% more than that. That is devastating. And let me give an example of that. In 2016, when Donald Trump came in and took the country by storm, having won the election in a landslide. I mean, Hillary Clinton can claim all she wants to that she won the election. You don't win elections by the popular vote, and nor do you want that. You want the election to be endorsed by the states, and the states were very jealous of their premier and primary position as the creators of the federal government. They did not want to lose and relinquish control of it because they were the creators of it, and the federal government was their daughter or their son. So as the creator of that, they wanted to be the custodians of it, and they wanted therefore to determine who the governor of that, the whole country, would be. And the states did that, not only for that reason, but they did it also because they're trying to control factions and understood how dangerous factions are, the most dangerous of which is the majority faction. And so what they did to address that problem without oppressing the majority faction, you can go read this in Federalist Paper 10, which is the most important of the Federalist Papers. I think 10 and 78 would be the most important ones. That's my view. I know 10 is the most important, but I think 78 would be probably the second most important of the Federalist Papers. And you can see here in Federalist Paper 10, written, of course, this is the first one written by the father of the Constitution. The other 9 before that were written by Alexander Hamilton and John Jay. 4 of that 9 were written by John Jay, and the other 5 were written by Alexander Hamilton. But James Madison wrote the first of his 29 Federalist Papers when he wrote number 10. He continued the conversation with that Hamilton opened up in 9 about factions, because they were trying to iron out how do you deal with factions. You didn't want to come in with the state being heavy-handed and then suppress their right to exist. But how do you then allow them to exist without them doing damage because they have the numbers on their side? Because the numbers would then imply the possibility that they would use their numbers to suppress the minority voice and then become a anti-democratic force. And so how do you corral that? And what they did was come up with like in terms of electing president, They did not want it to be by majority vote. They wanted it to be by the a consortium and not just a single majority. How do you do that? And what they came up with, all you people out there talking about you want to change it, boy, you stupid. What the framers did was, in fact, listen very carefully. They created, the way you deal with majorities is that you deal with majorities the same way you deal with a fire. You know, you hear people talking about fighting fire with fire. You know, you got a fire breaking out in California because of the management out there. Those fires being caused by the government in California, by the way. But the way the firefighters fight a fire is get ahead of the fire, and they burn in front of it, so that as the wind is blowing in a certain direction, they find out what direction it's going in to get ahead of the fire and burn that part out. So when it gets to that point, then there's no more rubbish, no underbrush, and so on for it to continue to burn. It burns itself out. They're fighting fire with fire. That's the formula the framers came up with in terms of how do you fight majorities without oppressing majorities. You fight a single majority by creating multiples of itself, and that's what 10 was trying. That's what 9 and 10 were trying to deal with, and they explained it brilliantly. You politicians, I tell you something. You all need to just get off this idea that you know anything, and just leave that which is in place because of the architectural developers of this country. You need to get off that and leave this alone because you're not qualified. I have to tell you something. You're not qualified to come behind the framers and say anything. Everything you've touched that has discombobulated what they did in that room. I keep saying this every time because it's so important we understand it. They're in that room. They're not just in there smoking cigars and so on. They're in that room thinking. And that's why the Constitution is so seamless. Anyone that reads it has to be impressed with it if you understand it, because it is such a seamless document. It's amazing how every part folds over to another part, and if you go and read ahead of this part that you're reading, and you read later on something that relates to that which was written before that, it's amazing how consistent it is with the future statements in the Constitution that ties into it. I'll talk about that when I get to impeachment and tell you some examples of it, for example, later on. But the way you fight majorities, you don't want to become oppressive because they have a right to their life as well. But how do you then restrain majorities? Because majorities are dangerous. And the framers were aware of that because they had studied history and they saw where the majorities are often wrong, but they have the numbers to be wrong and still carry the day. It doesn't mean that they're more rational because they have the numbers on their side. I knew that. That's why when they were screaming at me, when I took some positions against Obama, I'll take some positions against him now. And none of these persons hollering at me bother me. I don't care about them hollering. Some of my former students, they're still not qualified to tie my shoes. I can name some of them. I remember in my classroom, I felt like going back and changing their grades. Hollering at me. One of them, I know him very well, and we've been very close over the years and so on and so forth. But you make a fool of yourself thinking you are qualified. You're not qualified. You may think that you're not qualified. You weren't qualified in that classroom, and you're not qualified now. None of you, or a consortium of you. And I challenge you to prove me wrong. They were hollering in lockstep. Mr. Miles, you are disappointing the hell out of your students. They're going to have to be disappointed then. Because everything I was saying about Obama was true then. It's even more true now. And he'll go down in history, as I said, he will go down in history as one of the worst presidents this country has had. That's just the bottom line. And Eric Holder, who's out there right now as the former Attorney General under Barack Obama, will go down in history as one of the worst Attorney Generals in American history, worse than Mitchell. This man has a nerve to be talking about how he disappointed in Bill Barr. Holt is not qualified to carry Bill Barr's shoes. And for him to be disappointed, wrote an op-ed piece in the New York Times warning Durham, whose report is coming out hopefully soon. We'll be able to read a more definitive report when he comes out. And there, he's talking about warning Durham, because Durham is doing the more complete report, coming behind the report put out by Horowitz and so on. Okay, John just informed me we have to take a break at this point from WFOV has to take a break. And they are very good about coming back after the break is over. We hope you will do so today because we have some things we want to talk about we have not gotten around to yet. And we are going to make those points that need to be made to correct some statements being made by the scholars. I want to correct some of the scholars' comments. And I'm qualified to do it because I understand it better than they do.
Did you see that one of my friends?
I'll see you in 4 minutes.
One of my friends on Facebook, she's a leftist, and she posted something about Obama saying women are indisputably better than men. And I posted real quick. It's like, why did he fight Hillary Clinton for the for the nomination of the Democratic Party? So he's like, he's not consistent on that,
John, it's so much we got to. It's a lot of things we got to discuss. We need to have more discussions. More. That's another thing about. That's also something else about the majority issue. The way you deal with speech that's unpopular, you don't suppress speech. What you do is you increase speech. More speech trumps bad speech. Just have more speech. But what the left does, it wants to in fact suppress the speech that it disagrees with. And that's not the way you handle speech. You allow speech, and then you counter it with arguments that are better than the arguments that are being made. You silence the speech by the gratuity of the voice in which you speak, and that is how you suppress speech. You don't suppress it by saying they can't do it, because you don't want to, in fact, shortchange the liberties of the country. You want the liberties to be expansive, but you don't want them to win the right. You don't want them to rule the roost. And the way it is, in fact, contained is that there's a better voice that shows a better way than what they're saying, and that voice right there is suppressed out of its own cancer. It eats itself out of existence. You don't force it out of existence, and we have to learn how to do that, and because that's the ethical approach to do it. And those framers were ethical. They did not want to beat down on voices and factions. 10 deals with factions, factions, and the most dangerous faction is the majority faction. And the question was, how do you restrain it so that it does not have the breakout abuse that is capable of having because of the numbers and the size of it? How do you restrain it? And that took a level of brilliance that no one, I can say this right here, I don't think anybody will be able to contradict me on this. I don't think there's anyone that could today to be in a room and trying to deal, let's say nobody had ever dealt with that problem before. I can't see anyone today in this country or on the planet that would be able to figure out how are you going to in fact do that, because what we do right now is reach for government, and government is quote unquote force. That's what it is. We reach for force all the time because the ideas are not there. And so force, we handle a lot of our problems through government. And so that restrains our philosophical grounding points where you resolve problems in a less malicious way, and you resolve it because of the fortitude of your mind. You develop the mindset to be able to defeat bad points. You do it by having better points. John told me that WFOV has now come back. I want to thank you for coming back. And we are going to be here for another 30 minutes or so. We have not even gotten to the subject yet, but I want to make some preliminary points so that we can get to the meat and substance a little bit better, with a little bit more clarity. But there are some primary things I have to understand before we get to what I want to say about the some of the processes that are being discussed publicly right now, particularly on Facebook. And I'm very glad I'm back on there, by the way, because I'm able to have these conversations on a nationwide basis, and I like that, to be involved in conversation on a wider than just my assortment of friends here in the city of Flint. But we have to look at what the framers did and why they were able to accomplish what they accomplished. Because when you read the Constitution and understand it, and I do understand it, I definitely understand it, and that's why I know. That's why I know that what Dershowitz was saying is not true, and what Jonathan Turley is saying is not true. These people, they can tell somebody else they're scholars in the Constitution, and say what they're saying, and you can tell them I'm on here. I'm not scared of them, and they better not try to get on nothing that I'm on, and talk that and say what they're saying publicly and say that to me. I dare them to try it. You say that stuff that you're saying, and it's amazing. Okay, I'm not on television, national television, but I'll tell you this: Alan Dershowitz had better not say to me what he said on Mark Levine's show 2 weeks ago. He said, "Here's 65. This is Federalist Paper 65." Alan Dershowitz said, listen to this now. He said that Hamilton knew that the impeachment process was political, but he did not expect the process to be used politically. You know something? I'll tell you something. You can say that. You can say it to Mark Levine. You're not saying that to me, because I understand Federalist Paper 65 better than you do, Alan Dershowitz. Much better. And if you understood it, you would know how laughable that statement is. That comment is laughable. Here's the real fact. Go back and read it again for yourself. Here's the real fact. Not only did Hamilton recognize the political aspects of the impeachment process, but they anticipated its political use and then set into motion things against it. And what stands against it being prevailing is the check and balance system. And you're too silly to understand that the check and balance system is not just the separation of powers in Articles 1, 2, and 3, but the separation, but the check and balance system operates throughout the Constitution. Isn't that true? And no one has said that because nobody understands it. They want to see I was listening to Chuck Schumer. He's another ignoramus. The guy that's a senator from New York. He's ignoramus. There are very few. There's a person that I saw named Johnson, an attorney. He was one of the person they put in front of the camera, and he was talking about the impeachment going on in the House, and he was one of the person that came forward and was speaking. You know how they do it to get everybody around them, and then they have one person at the microphone. I was surprised to see how coherent he was, and I don't know him, but I was really impressed with his ability to articulate his point of view. So he's a smart man, but he's very rare in that body. And one of the dummies in there, 3 stand out in particular. Well, a lot of them stand out, but the ones that have positions that are in front of the public right now that stand out more than others. I mean, these are some real ignoramuses, and I'll name them. Gerald Nadler is one from New York. This man that is just hard to take from California, Adam Schiff. It's hard to take this man. This man is totally ignorant. One of the, don't know all the ones in the background, but he's one of the most ignorant ones out there in the public limelight. You cannot be that. You cannot be that ignorant and represent a district of people that have any sense. I don't have to go to his district. Just tell me how many times has that man been elected in that district, and that tells me all I need to know about that district, because this man is totally ignorant, and he's been repeatedly placed in the position he's in right now, and he has no fear of his voters because he knows what he's dealing with in that district. That's why he represents them so badly, and they don't even recognize apparently how badly they're being represented by this man. This man is a national embarrassment. Up there making stuff up and reading, acting like he's reading the conversation between the president and Zelensky. This is outrageous. And he probably win by a landslide. You know, in some of those Democratic districts, this is the honest, the gospel truth. In some of those Democratic districts, when you run awry of the law, your numbers go up. When you, in fact, I'm gonna give you my reading on it, why it takes place. When you, in fact, make some errors of judgment, your numbers don't go down in many of these Democratic districts. Your numbers go up. I'll give you an example of that with Jesse Jackson Jr., Jesse Jackson's son, who is just about as corrupt as his father was. And then Rangel over in New York, Rangel was representing the 15th district, I think it was, New York. Rangel had 11 ethics violations, 13 violations. He, in fact, was found actionable within 11 of them. And you would think then, okay, there's some accountability here. Not that I thought so, but you would think there would be some accountability. 11 violations that you actually were found that were found actionable against you. Out of the 13 that were brought to bear upon the House floor, his numbers went up. So Jesse Jackson's Jr. numbers go up, and there's a reason for that. My opinion. And that reason is that by showing these flaws, then the constituencies that they represent see them being like they are, and therefore have lower demand upon them having a higher standard because they don't have that standard themselves. And people are not going to like me for saying this one. The reason that blacks, you can get mad all you want to. I'm gonna say this, and you can do what you want with it, because I don't care what you say. Because I know something that you don't know, and that is you're not qualified to tie my shoes. The reason that blacks hold whites to a higher standard of treatment of black people than they hold themselves is because they understand they don't have any standard toward black people, and that's why they allow black people shooting black people to go unnoticed and unchallenged. Ain't nobody demonstrating in Chicago, Philadelphia, Detroit, Flint. They're not out there demonstrating. But let somebody walk down the street in a sheet that's not posing a threat and see what happens. Have a pointed hat on. If they walk down the street and they don't and they can walk down the street all they want to. The Klan does not pose a threat to black people today. You can say what you want to about it. The Klan was a problem in your grandfather's day. And when they were a problem, they were a problem because the Democratic Party sicked them on black people. And that's a party that black people identify with 90%. And they have the nerve to tell those persons that have broken off away, those who are woke, call them Uncle Toms, and they're selling out their grandparents. Try that with the Jews.
By the way, do you remember 20-some years ago, NPR actually had a series of, NPR actually had a thing about if you were to award, medals for racism and, the amount of people who died and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And actually the gangs at that point actually have already killed more of each, blacks have killed each other, blacks than the Klan ever did in its entire 75-year run, but it's like, so if you're going to give awards to killing people, and they had to pull that ad, because it was considered controversial. But it was, they just give the square numbers. And that was NPR. This is like 23, 25, 26 years ago, something like that. Yeah. And I was in college yet when I was going on. I went, wow, that's, it's like, it's a fact. The KKK was a big thing back in the 1900s. Early 1900s up to about 1960. And before that, in the South, when it was, and it had grown, beyond its borders normally. But let's face it, it's not a threat that I could see that other terrorist groups are, and they are. If there are still diehards in there, yeah, they're terrorists, in my opinion. They're terrorists or potential terrorists, but it's not that. It's not a deadly threat. Like it's like you're chasing ghosts right now. That's what I think.
Well, how do you identify with the party if you're really against the Klan, which would bring a lot of person out on the street in protest of their presence? And I'm not advocating the Klan. I'm just simply making a point about contrast the response to the Klan and contrast that with the response to those who are doing more killing than the Klan. This one guy said today on Facebook, this is on, I won't call her name out on the air, but I read her posts all the time, and she knows who I'm talking about because her post is very, very popular. I certainly pay a lot of attention to it. But she had a older gentleman that had written a book apparently called, it was something about the biggest threat to blacks is not the police, is not racism, and the person was talking about why blacks lose and putting some of the onus on what black people are doing. Well, that's a no-no among blacks. They don't want to hear that, and you're trying to hear none of that about any responsibility on their part to be more person responsible. What are you talking about? Get out of here and shut up. And so this one guy responded to it, and he wrote and said, this is nothing but BS and blah blah. This is terrible. And what is he talking about? So I asked him on the line, what correction are you going to make statistically about what he said? And write your objection while I wait right here. Of course, I haven't heard from this person because they want to make the objection, but when they're challenged on it, then they don't have any information to put in this place. They just want to simply object because like your ear, you pull your ear, sounds wrong because nobody is saying that. A lot of stuff sounds wrong because what sounds right is that which is said repetitively. So they don't repeat these things. They repeat all the other stuff. People think because of the repetitiveness of it and don't realize that's a tactic in terms of getting the nonsense to be accepted in the public domain. You get it memorized. And so they repeat it in a cycle. I think Goebbels said there was he the one that said that, and then you said loud also. This is another one of the rules for radicals of Solinsky. That you and I see a lot of this principle used, but one of them is that you simply through repetition say things over and over again so that people will begin to understand just by the repetitiveness of it that it must be true. Otherwise, why do they keep on saying it? So that's one of the tactics. And of course, another tactic they use the one somebody else on Facebook wrote the other day, and they were saying that one of Saul Alinsky's rules was, in fact, blame the opposition for what you are doing, so as to create a distraction. So they would think, since you're making an accusation against the other person, he must be the one guilty of it. Why are you, in fact, doing it yourself?
Well, it's like, I don't know how I can put this in delicate terms, but we have a term for that, but I don't want to say it on air. But it's like, you ever been into like a crowded room or something like that, and all of a sudden a bad smell hits, and everybody's looking around to, who passed gas, right? But basically, the one making out the most vocal, like, who did that, is the one doing it, okay?
Yeah. So I read a case of that in this book called Ball 4, written by, I think his name was Jim Bowden, played for the Yankees. And he was talking about how they would have these meetings, these baseball meetings, New York Yankees meetings in the clubhouse. And they would talk about somebody having stated something to the media, and they would talk about some of the in-house stuff that was going on that should not have been made out and placed in the public domain, and so on and so forth. And Elston Howard, who's a catcher for the New York Yankees, played catcher and then left field. And he just would go off, who would be this traitor? Who would do that to the team? Blah, blah, blah. And Bowden said, they found out it was Elston Howard. Doggone him. I can't believe somebody would do that to the team and betray us.
What does it say? That he thinks they'll protest too much? Protest too much? Yeah, it's like, oh my God, what a horrible person.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Watch the person that says ouch, and then and watch that, because that's most of the time 9 out of 10, probably 10 out of 10 in a lot of cases, is a person that is in fact guilty of it. Another tactic that was one used yesterday. This is one that was used by James Comey on Chris Wilder's show yesterday. People are writing about that now, but you know what Jim Comey did was, first of all, the way he was doing on Chris Wilder's show, he won't go on some of the other programs. Now you go on Chris Wilder's show, you have to ask yourself why they feeling so comfortable going on Chris Wilder's show. They're never going to go on Tucker Carlson's show. You think that that James Comey would go on the show of Hannity? Hannity will give him 4 hours. 3 hours on his radio show, another hour on his night program. You won't find Comey on there, but they're over there with Chris Wallace.
Comey would hang himself in a half hour or so.
Yeah, if he's on Hannity's program, he would, because Hannity would challenge him. And what Wallace does is throw these lob these softballs up there, so as to make it appear that he's conservative. He's just as he's over to the left of Shepard Smith, who had the integrity to stand down and leave, because he was totally out of sync over there with Fox, and some of the others in those daytime shows are out of sync, but don't have the integrity to go over there and join MSNBC and CNN and NBC, CBS, and ABC, those networks that are liberal networks that have a vested interest in the liberal narrative. Some of the others need to go over there and join their quote unquote comrades, because they're over there to the left also, with Mao and Saul Alinsky and some of the others under the table, and don't want to identify themselves as such. But that's where they are. So Comey was over there with Chris Wallace yesterday. And Chris Wallace is trying to act like he's lobbing some hard shots in there to hold him accountable and things of that sort. By the way, he had Comey on there. And guess who else he had on there yesterday? Adam Schiff. To give them an airing in front of Donald Trump's base. I mean, that's the politics of it, isn't it? To bring them into Donald Trump's wheelhouse, so as to wean some of those supporters away from Donald Trump, while pretending that he is in fact interrogating them, and so on and so forth. That's Chris Wallace. And what James Comey was doing was another tactic. The Horowitz report, which was very condemnatory of the former director of the FBI, James Comey. But what Comey would do was embrace some of the allegations and deny that it has anything to do about him. That's a tactic. And if you are paying attention and you're woke, you understand the tactic. To embrace the report in some of his allegations, and then act as if you have a report that's exculpatory, meaning that it has exonerated you of any of the behavior that's accusing him of, and so he claims victory. That's a tactic they used. Let me see. There's another tactic. Here's one that they use. They'll say, my recollection is, and how do you contravene that? You can't, because it's not your recollection. He never claimed it was your recollection. It's his recollection, and you don't know what his memory, contains. So they get out of it by saying things like that. My recollection of it is, and there he's sitting in the room where the planning is going on. So his recollection is, and they don't say that it happened that way. That's not what they're saying. They're saying their recollection is that this is the truth. But if you find out it's not true, well, they had a false memory. Or you do what Michael Horowitz did in the IG report. He's another scoundrel. Here's what he was doing in that report. Listen to this very carefully, because these people are scoundrels. There was no testimonial evidence, or in the report it says there was no documentary evidence of bias in the request for the FISA application to surveil President Trump's his campaign. There was no. Now listen to this carefully. Listen to these words here. Ask yourself the question: why are these modifiers in there? You see, it's different. You may hear it differently than what is stated. There is no testimonial evidence. There's no documentary evidence of any bias. So why are those modifiers there? What were they used for? To make it look like something is being said is not being said. In order for there to have been any testimonial evidence, then the person that was filing the claim for a application to be passed by the FISA court to surveil the campaign of Donald Trump, in order to have any testimonial evidence, they would have to go in there and say they were lying. Which would, in fact, I think you would admit, would defeat the purpose of them going there asking for the surveillance in the first place. Let me tell you something that everybody's missed. Everybody. All the commentators, every last one of them, what they miss about this, I don't want to call him out of his name, this jerk, Carter Page. Everybody's so sympathetic. He ought to sue the FBI, the Justice Department, for ever since they have. This man was abused, they say, by the intelligence network. Well, they may feel that way. I don't feel that way. Carter Page deserves everything that he's getting, because what happened to him is the same thing that happened to Lee Harvey Oswald. Carter Page, the report shows it. Carter Page was an undercover agent of the CIA. That's in the report. Horowitz didn't see any bias in the report, in requests for the surveillance. But that right there shows bias. You know why it shows bias? Is because if you admit in the report that Carter Page had CIA connections and he's inside of Donald Trump's camp, then you'll see why they were assured that there was Russian contact in the Trump campaign, because they placed it there. And that's why they knew there was contact. Understand that Carter Page's responsibility was to have contact inside of the campaign, because they had planted him there. But also his job was, in fact, to be an undercover counterintelligence agency to countermand what the Russians were doing. And that made him have to have contact with the Russians. And they used that in order to then go to the FISA court and ask for the FISA court to give them surveillance, because they thought Donald Trump's campaign was colluding with the Russians. They created the collusion. And there are people talking about that Carter Page should go and sue them for every cent they have. This is Tucker Carlson's position last week. And I don't have no respect for Carter Page, because Carter Page, after they made use of him, they then did the same thing to him that they did to Lee Harvey Oswald. They cast him aside and threw him under the bus because he had no further utility for them. You have to go and study this to understand how they operate. Once you understand it, you see everything that they're doing. Okay. We'll deal with this issue again next week. We're not off of it yet. They'll be impeaching the president later on this week, and we'll be watching everything they're doing. I think it's going to probably happen Wednesday. And we'll be watching everything they're doing, and we'll report back here next week about what occurred. Until next week, we want you to follow your dream, because if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.